We've already mentioned the multifocal epithelial hyperplasia, which we tried to break down earlier into parts to kind of give meaning to this three-part name. Isolated lesions can simply be called focal epithelial hyperplasia instead of using the multifocal adjective. But obviously, this is not a hard and fast rule, and both focal and multifocal are used irrespective of the number of lesions. Also, we mentioned that Dr. Hex had co-authors at the time of his report, so it stands to reason that some people may name the disease after these co-authors, and hence Alka's disease or Stanley's lesions are some eponyms that may be used interchangeably with Hex disease. Another term that you may come across is multifocal papilloma. The term papilloma simply is just a common name given to lesions that have a warty appearance, and Hex disease will not be an exception, even though the characteristic finger-like projections of papillomas will not be a common finding in Hex lesions. Here is a clinical case of Hex disease in an 8-year-old female, and you can easily observe the multifocal and widespread nature of the lesions. Here. In fact, it goes all throughout the oral mucosal surface, forming what you might consider a pebbly carpet appearance. The lesions are human papillomavirus or HPV induced, and the serotypes exclusively known to be responsible are serotypes 13 and 32, which can be identified using the polymerase chain reaction or PCR. The viruses are thought to induce these multiple solid eruptions, which are by far asymptomatic and insidious in growth. The lesions, as you can see, are normal mucosal colored or normochromic or pink, though sometimes they may exhibit surface hyperkeratosis, which will give them a white color on clinical grounds. Other times too, masticated trauma could cause ulceration, and therefore they may appear somewhat erythematous or even be yellowish when the ulcer becomes covered by a fibrin-rich pseudomembrane. Individual lesions will have a flat-topped surface that is usually smooth, but when multiple lesions form close together or coalesce, a pebbly cobblestone appearance of the oral mucosa is seen, similar to what the mucosal granulomatous bumps of Crohn's disease may look like. Now, if you look at this mucosa carefully, you can probably tell, at least by a rough estimation, that most of these lesions have a diameter between, say, 2 mm to 10 mm, or maybe even a wider range, with some lesions being papules and others being nodules. Therefore, the best description for this case will be papillonodular mucosal swellings, which in fact is a usual presentation of Hex disease. Now let us digress a bit to define these primary dermatological terms. Here is a swelling schematically on the oral mucosa. By definition, papules and nodules are solid lesions, meaning they are not fluid containing, unlike blisters or pustules, which contain clear fluid and purulent material respectively. Vesiculobulous lesions like pemphigus are characterized by blisters, whereas acne and certain forms of psoriasis are characterized by pustular eruptions. Telling papular swellings from nodular swellings is based on size, and the reference used varies amongst different authors and professionals. In this lecture, let's set our reference to 0.5 centimeters or 5 millimeters, so that any solid swelling that is less than 5 millimeters in diameter is considered a papule, whilst those that are 5 millimeters or more are referred to as nodules. So basically, papules are smaller versions of nodules, and nodules are really papules that have enlarged in height, width, and length to have a diameter of at least 5 millimeters or more. Papules and nodules may either be pedunculated, that is having a stalk connecting the main lesion to the mucosal surface like so, or be sessile, in which the whole circumference of the main lesion is attached firmly to the oral mucosal surface. When we transfer and apply this little piece of information to a clinical case, we can confidently confirm that these lesions are papillonodular sessile lesions. And like I said, this is the usual presentation of most Hex cases. One feature of Hex lesions is that a single isolated lesion, which can actually be the beginner or early lesion, can become less visible and blend nicely with the rest of the mucosa when the tissue is stretched, thanks to its resilience and normochromic color. This behavior is very characteristic and may help to clinically differentiate